Welcome to the Web Platform Podcast. This is episode number 30. We are live. And today we're going to be talking about community contributions. We're not just talking about code, we're talking about a lot of different things. Some of us, we take it for granted that, libraries and frameworks, gists, code pens, blogs, screencasts, podcasts, all these things that we pull in and consume, that's someone else's really hard work or the community's hard work. And it's nice to know how we can, give back to that community, whether it's a closed community or an open community. It's it's the same type of thing, but it's a little different. But we have a guest today, and just a couple of us. We're talking with Levent Gersis, and he is mobile developer and founder of Movell, which is a mobile company that's doing some really innovative stuff in the mobile application space. And Christian Smith, open source developer and startup enthusiast on our panel. Danny Blue, front-end engineer at Deloitte Digital. And myself, Eric Isaacson, UX engineer at 3 Pillar Global. So welcome, Levent.
Thanks.
Did I totally butcher how I pronounce your name?
Yes, absolutely. No, sounds great.
Please correct me.
No, it sounds great.
Awesome. So you're doing a lot of innovative stuff as far as contributing to, different communities in, product development and startups and developers and engineering. Can you talk a little bit about what you're doing?
Yes. How about I start with the meetup community around Washington, D.C., because it's a very vibrant community, and with people like you and Danny and others, we really have a great base of developers and speakers and people who actually devote their time to helping and contributing to other developers like myself. So I've been a long-time meetup fan and been going to a lot of meetup groups around Angular, JavaScript, data, search, and last year I decided to take over the mobile development group. Back in the day, it used to be called iOS Developers Group in Washington, D.C. It was about 75 members, I remember, last August. And ever since I took it over, I renamed it to, with my co-organizers, I renamed it to Mobile DC. And we're 750 people now, which is really great. And we're working real hard to invite people to come to town and give us presentations in various aspects, not just iOS, but now we branched to Android and cross-platform mobile development. So it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of good community around DC right now.
So does your company do any open source contributions? Anything like that?
Yes, we do. Open source contributions, both for the meetup. So each meetup and presentation actually is we create a couple of small projects as part of the meetup. So we have an organization in GitHub called Mobile DC, and within that repo we have about 15 projects. They're all open source. And in the classical sense of the word, we also contribute to some other open source projects online as well.
All right. So Christian, you do a lot of open source work. You recently have some new innovative things going on with your Connect ID server. Can you talk a little bit about how people have contributed with your project?
Sure. Anvil Connect started out when I was working on a different startup idea and ran into all these different auth problems. And it just it started to make sense to have that all into one product, that it should be a piece of infrastructure. Just like you install a database, you install an authorization server and build your stuff around that. And so there was, at the time, I talked to a few other developers and a couple of clients and things like that, and everybody seemed to think that this was a really good idea. And so I ended up just diving in and building it. Starting to build it, and at first there were a lot of crickets. Everybody's really excited when you set out on a venture. even if it's just an open source project or something, people get really excited about it up front, and then kind of back off and wait to see what you come up with. And so went through a period of time like that, and but I did manage to get people to stay involved and talk about it, if not actively develop on it. And over time, over the past year or so, we've gotten to the point I get maybe a new pull request out of the blue just about every week from someone I've never heard of, which is very exciting. And we have this in production with one company and another that's going into production in 4 to 6 weeks. So
that's awesome.
Yeah, congrats.
Yeah, because don't they, if you're a glutton for punishment, curate a popular open source project.
I'm sorry, was that a question? I missed part of it.
Oh no, I was just saying. So it sounds like you're starting to become pretty successful, and some people will say that if you're a glutton for punishment, you should curate a popular open source project.
I don't know if this is a popular one yet. What's really interesting is that all the people that find this seem to be older developers like myself that have been around the block a couple of times and have some ideas about architecture that are a little bit different. Like you start to realize that, oh, it's not a great idea to build this one enormous application, and you need to break it into smaller pieces, or maybe you have different platforms to support, things like that. And so once you do that, you need this function to be a separate component that can serve many different apps and APIs. I don't think it's popular, but what's interesting about this work is that everyone that's using it is very heavily engaged in developing it as well. So maybe it'll be popular someday. I hope so.
Yeah, I remember when I first looked at GitHub and I saw all this code out in the open, and I know we had to talk about open source already, so I won't go too far into that, but I do want to say that there was this fear of contributing, where people are going to see my stuff and see, that I'm not as good as they are, and maybe I shouldn't do anything. Do you think that that's true for most people, or do you think it's just, well, I don't want to, I have my job to do, and I'm just going to take whatever I can from the community because it's there, and sure, I'm going to abide by all the licenses and everything, but I'm not going to give back. I don't have time to do all that. How do you guys feel about that?
I mean, part of it, I think it depends on the exact community that you're a part of. First of all, can you guys hear me okay?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, cool. But so it kind of depends on the exact circle that you're running in, because it can be pretty intimidating for somebody, especially if you've never contributed before or never put your own work out there. Nobody wants to get their work smacked down or whatever. Nobody wants to seem like they don't know what they're doing. So a lot of it is just especially getting started, starting with documentation, or starting with very, very small things that already exist, rather than having these ideas of grandeur. I'm going to add this enormous piece of functionality that everybody's going to go crazy of. If you kind of start smaller and start building up from there, and you get more familiar with whatever project you're working on, and eventually those fears kind of subside when you realize not everybody on the internet is an asshole. So.
Yeah, I have similar experience with you, Eric, which is the first couple of times it was a little hard to really submit a pull request for that particular reason. But now, after seeing people's attitudes change completely different when you actually do everything in the open, and just last week we had a guest on our Mobile DC meetup, a gentleman from New York, actually from Couchbase Mobile, to present his solution for the mobile community, and their entire stack is open source out there. And imagine a company with 10, 15 developers that you work with your teammates in a corporate kind of a setting, but everything is in the open. So people see your every line of code every day. which is a completely interesting dynamic. And it's just I just started thinking about Movell, and within my new startup, I'd like to have projects that I do completely everything online and open source for everybody to see. Not client projects, obviously, but some of our internal projects, some of our, even the website itself, the corporate website we're still working on. Why not have something like DocPad and have something like a Web Components org, something in the open, where if people see they can add an event, they can just give us a pull request and add that, which sounds really fantastic.
Do you foresee like your company doing a lot of blogging and writing as well as contributing to like open source projects or doing your own open source projects?
I would like to. I would like to our people to write, but also I think models where companies are able to attract community members, community contributions from other people that are not employees or directly linked to the community. I think those are the magical combinations where they can attract somehow or invite somebody of an industry leader to come as a guest contributor to their blogs or to their platforms. Then it becomes a little more than your mouthpiece for your company and more of a community information radiator, something that's happening. And that's a really noble goal that I have for Movell. Hopefully we will become part of this community, born out of the community, and do something for the community as well.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that's a great way to look at it. I think too. The reason I bring that up is I feel like a lot of companies look at it as well. We have our agenda. We have these things we need to do, and we think that this is great, and you should definitely evangelize and put stuff out there, but do it on your own time because we're not going to pay you for it. And there is a cost to doing a lot of this stuff, whether it's time, whether it's money, or whether it's your own efforts. There's definitely a cost, and I know that a lot of companies look at it in different ways.
I mean, look at Joyent and Node and how much all the potential kind of community issues they're having now because they have this really large open source thing that they're the curators of that has become this huge thing that everybody likes. So then you run into other problems there. So like if this was just a project that they were just using internally, they could do whatever they wanted, and nobody would really, no one would really say anything. But now it's become so popular, and then as soon as the environment that you're putting your project out there can change, and people can get impatient, and then you end up with stuff like IO.js, which hopefully will eventually get brought back into Node. But there are also risks to putting stuff out there if it's going to be a core. I mean, Node is the only reason I know I've heard of Joyent, and it's probably true for a lot of developers. So you even look at Tilda and Ember when it's part, that's not what part of their company is developing that open source project. So they do have to listen to you got to listen to your but then you also have to listen to the community, because one of the reasons people know of you and know about you is because of your open source project. If you don't keep them involved and you don't keep them, not necessarily like pander to them, but if you don't keep them happy, it can negatively impact you as well as just the positive you get from the exposure.
Mm-hmm. What are some other benefits, either personally or for a business, do you think that contributing code or contributing even writing and presentations to the community?
You get practice for one, like just from the code side. The way you get better at code is by writing more code, and it's even better when you have a lot of eyes on it, because then you got to be careful of those little things that maybe you weren't going to do because nobody's going to look at this. Everybody's going to look at it. So it's part of its practice, and it enforces standards, especially if you don't have that much experience in a team-based, software development type thing. There are, for sure. Like if you want to go and you want to contribute to the Yeoman project, they have rules. They're like, this is the way that we organize our code. This is the format your comments need to be in. So part of it is just practice and practice for things that you're going to have to do in your professional career, as well as just what you do for fun in your personal time.
Right, and there are other social benefits, I would say, as well. There's a meetup group and a project in DC called Code for DC, and these guys are special because they gather around and they write open source code to help DC residents in many different ways. So one of their projects helps reduce the paperwork needed for housing for people, from 8 PDF forms to a single online form, which is a really good project. When you think about it, it's not just, we think of open source and sharing as coders maybe sometimes, but there are tremendous social benefits and tremendous social infusion, or other parts of life are actually importing our knowledge, this sharing and open sourcing, contributing and volunteering knowledge into their domains, and I can already see the change around DC because of that. So it's another aspect.
That's a great point.
Danny brought up the subject of interacting with your community, and how that holds you accountable, and how you have to kind of adapt to what people want. And one thing that I learned actually from Ward Cunningham is this idea of having weekly hangouts. He does this with his federated wiki project. It's like a distributed version control version of the wiki. And so every week he has these hangouts, and people that use this or are interested or whatever can show up, and they have direct conversations about it. And I've stolen the idea for Anvil Connect, and we do weekly hangouts for that. And I have to say, I wish more open source projects would do this kind of thing. Like to be able to show up and talk to the authors about what they're doing, or ask them questions directly about how something works, or watch a code review. Those things really kind of inspire confidence to get involved in something where maybe like everyone was saying, there's this inhibition about getting involved in the first place because it's impersonal, and you're afraid, you're terrified that someone's going to look at your work and judge it horribly. But when you're interacting with these people face to face, it becomes a completely different story. And I'd also say that the ecstasy, the great ecstatic feeling you get when somebody accepts your pull request and merges it in, it definitely counterbalances that terror that you're going to be criticized for your work. So I would recommend that all open source projects that have a substantial number of users have regular hangouts where users can go and talk to people, talk to each other, and talk to the authors. And also that every developer, if they have not already done so, find something to submit a pull request to and get it accepted, because you will feel so much better about your work.
It's interesting to me that stuff. Sorry, Danny.
Okay, I was just going to say, and that's kind of what I was saying before, also about it's not just the code stuff that needs an exact pull request as well. Sometimes it's the documentation. Sometimes it's just updating the README to reflect recent updates or changes or something like that. A lot of that stuff are really good places to get started. And the other thing I wanted to bring up that Christian was kind of talking about with the Hangouts, the Ember team actually does. There's a really good episode of JavaScript Jabber about like the road to Ember 2.0 with Yehuda Katz and
Tom Dale.
Yeah, I think and they talk that they even have a like an in-person like board of advisors type thing with some of like the biggest contributors. So like that's not as open or whatever, but the fact that they have that personal connection with a lot of the people that are the core contributors to this project, I think is another really good thing to think about, especially if you start to get bigger and you do need some sort of direction.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's interesting, like the way that, like, all the pull requests I've gotten and feedback on issues I've done. There's a lot of mistakes I've made, and I haven't had anyone be nasty to me or anything. So like on open source projects, people will write back with constructive criticism. There's a very positive feeling in general. But to contrast that, there's things like Reddit and Hacker News where, there's you put out, maybe you write an article about, why JavaScript is the best language ever, and then it turns into a flame war of hate. So, I mean, how do you mitigate that? How do you still want to contribute with such negativity around?
Stay off of Reddit.
Yeah, stay off of Hacker News.
True story. True story.
I've actually run into a couple of extremely bitter, cynical, critical people over the years, and I have to say that we're really, really lucky that most developers are not like that. But I think because those folks tend to be so loud and they tend to go places like Hacker News and just trash everything, you get the idea that that's more prominent than it really is. And for anybody that runs into that, I would encourage them to try again elsewhere, because most developers are really just optimistic, awesome people and willing to help each other out. And you won't run into that as a rule. It is the exception, in my experience.
And they want you to succeed. Like if you have a great idea for a pull request for some project, whether it's if it's a bug fix, it's whatever, the curators of that project want you to do well. They want you to fix problems, and they want you to add features, and they want them to work well. So they will work with you to get them to that state. Mm-hmm. So it can't be obviously can't be a blanket statement, but a lot of projects are like that. Like Eric was talking about, people will come back with constructive criticism, or just ask questions, being like, why did you do this? Would this actually be better, and stuff like that, and not turn into these and not turn into these flame wars of I would have done it this way, so obviously the way you did it is wrong.
Right, and to Christian's earlier point, I couldn't agree more with the, I wish more open source project leaders or evangelists would do these hangouts to, I guess, initiate or ease in people. I think that's a great idea, and just gave me the idea, maybe even as community organizers, with this technology that we have right now, Google Hangouts, we could perhaps even put together a virtual meetup where we invite open source projects around the topic, let's say mobile platforms or mobile libraries that are really popular, and invite these guys, the founders or leaders in them, and just throw together a virtual Google Hangouts for people to come, and with the sole purpose of initiating them to start contributing to their projects. I think that could be a great event, both as a live event for people to come attend and get some pizza and some free beer, but also to the community at large if they join and get a few tips how to contribute or how to make their projects better, because we all use these libraries. It's not a point of not using. We all owe them something, and that could be our little contribution back to the projects.
Actually, I have a question for you guys. It's kind of prompted a question. I want to see what you guys think of this. So what do you think of companies like Famous, who their open source project is the company, versus a company like Tilda, which is the where Yehuda Katz and Tom Dale work, to say, I believe anyway, where Ember is just kind of this side thing that they use in the company, but if Tilda went away, Ember would still be around. And maybe you couldn't say the same for Famous. If in a month from now Famous went bankrupt, it would maybe it would sputter along for a while, but who knows if it would really carry on at the steam that's going now. Compare something like Ember, which Tilda could go away, and Ember would keep going just fine, hopefully. So what do you think about the two different kind of models for big open source projects?
Well, I can't comment on big open source projects, and I can't comment for anyone else. But I would really like to form a business, a startup out of my open source project, and already kind of halfway there, because it is my full-time work. and it is being funded by users that pay me to build stuff into it. So the next step is, to make a company out of that and make it easier to do business with other companies. And I mean, I think having it goes back to the startup thing where you raise a bunch of money and it's very exciting, and you're making, what was that? I think it was on The Simpsons or something, like 10 years ago, hypercompuglobal.meganet.com or something, where you have a great name and you have a bunch of graphic design and stuff like that, but you don't have anything that people want. It's just a bunch of hype. And I think that it makes a lot of sense when an open source project gets to a certain point where users want support to make that into a company that does it. Because like all other things in open source, even though it's free, there's no such thing as a free lunch. The work, either it gets paid for one way or another. And, just like other business things, what gets paid for gets done. So.
Yeah. Well, Vin, you also brought up before that you also brought up that you wish that there was something out there that explores these open source projects and talks about them, right?
Right.
So, I mean, Chris and I have been pretty busy with our own things, but we run a hangout called Read the Source, which takes like open source projects, and we take a small piece of it if it's a large one, or we look through the whole thing depending on the size, and then we have people come on. Anybody who wants to join in the hangout can just join, and we go through the code step by step and talk about what's happening at certain points. And sometimes they run a little longer because we're going through code, obviously, but it was brought up because one time we were working on an Angular project, and we had trouble debugging what was happening, and we wanted to understand Angular a lot better.
And so we read through all the Angular source code together for several months, as it turns out.
Yeah.
No, I think that's a great idea. It's just hangouts like that should become more popular. Or in my physical meetup world, I have access to 10,000 developers around the DC area. I'm a member, organizer, or co-organizer of about 20 different meetups with a combined access to 10,000 people. And for one reason or another, a lot of people don't know about these either hangouts or even open source projects, or the contribution levels are not there. We need, as a community, to put a little bit more effort to help each other, spread the word out, and make sure that we get the best out of our community, because we have some brilliant people. They come to our meetups or join hangouts, but they don't necessarily know how to contribute, or they don't take the first step. So
sometimes it's just because like GitHub can be a big step, right? You have to not only sign up and learn how GitHub works, you have to know how Git works, you have to understand what a pull request is, and all these things that you have to know. Sometimes I know we were talking earlier about CodePen, and we had Chris Coyer on the show not too long ago, and you were saying that you use it for certain types of contributions. Can you talk about that?
Which one? I'm sorry. What was the question?
For CodePen? Can
Yes,
you talk about
yes.
how you're using CodePen, basically?
Yeah, so CodePen is great for designers and HTML and CSS programmers, because it gives you this three-pane view of your HTML file, your CSS or JavaScript, and then you can see the results at the bottom in real time. And it's great to play with that in real time, and it does save and gives you versions as well. It's a little bit of a faster, if you will, a workflow than just having it in Sublime and then going back to a browser and refresh. You can use live reload and all that, but with CodePen you can also share that piece of code with somebody else, and I think that's a great way to share. It's a little different than a just code, because you get all three panes at the same time, all three pieces of the code, and also has a support for J templates and a couple other template engines as well. And alongside the CSS has support for less and style sheets as well. So I just really enjoy it as a quick tool, online editor, and sharing with other developers like me.
Very cool.
Have you guys ever heard of a site called Assembly?
Yes.
Yes.
That's the site that you go and join a project and you build a startup together. Basically, you join and you build the product or the startup on an equity basis, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, so like it's kind of like a actually pretty similar to the way that a GitHub type thing would work. I think they either have or are currently working on some sort of integration with GitHub, but the same way. So, but they have issues that they need worked on. They have features that they need built, and they put these. I think they call them bounties out, and which are you can or whatever they decide, however many they decide to give. But then the idea is that if you contribute to this project, you end up kind of owning a part of that, whatever that product is. Like I think there's one out there's a node-based CMS called Buckets, I believe, is a pretty big project on there. So, but the idea is if some people need maybe more incentive to get involved with some some more like open source stuff that's out there for the community, those you get. One, you would get that thrill of having your pull request accepted and merged into the core code base, but then you also get you get kind of a little intangible reward out of it. It could end up being nothing, or maybe it could end up turning into something. Maybe not the best career move to drop everything and just start working on things on on assembly, but like I said, sometimes it gamifies it a little bit, which makes it, I mean, we all build applications that helps people get more involved sometimes when they get something out of it, when there's a little carrot at the end of the stick. But if anybody out there listening has not heard of it, it's definitely a cool project to go take a look at and kind of troll around on there and see what you can find.
Yeah, definitely. I'll have to check that out. You guys, how do you feel about evangelists, developer advocates, and companies sending out their teams to talk about open source or products or whatever? Do you feel that that's a helpful type of person to have out there? Do you feel like they're doing just corporate agenda work? How do you guys feel about that?
I think that probably depends on the company and the project and the evangelist. I could see things going horribly wrong and being incredibly helpful. I think Google does a pretty good job of some of this stuff. Like they have dedicated groups working on open source stuff and someone to manage it and the promotion, the whole thing. Not every company has the kind of bandwidth to pay people just to work on open source that Google does, unfortunately. Or we'd all be doing open source all day long because it's fun.
Well, as we found out, Microsoft does a lot of that too.
Yeah.
Firefox, almost everything's open source. So
Yeah.
there's a few out there that are really.
Yeah, I think it's incredibly valuable anytime a business commits resources to work on open source. I think it's good for the business, it's good for their customers, it's good for users of the software, and it's good for other developers because, like with Angular or React or something like that, Facebook and Google built these things in-house to use for their own stuff, but we get to benefit from that. We don't have to reinvent those wheels. And an evangelist, drives that forward, helps people know about it and use it. So,
right. In my experience, there is a balance between, a little bit of selling and a little bit of helping the community. And we as organizers or as facilitators, we have the maturity to understand that. If a company is going to put the resources and the money to send somebody to speak at our events, it's to be expected that they're going to do a certain level of selling and awareness, increasing awareness of their product, which is cool. My strategy is to research the presenter, so I really want to talk to developers if we're going to have a talk for developers. So making the match, I'm not against salespeople, but I want to match the salespeople with the right audience because you put a salesperson in front of developers, it doesn't go really well. So, if we have a developer advocate who himself is hands-on, and he does a little bit of selling in the beginning, but then he actually goes hands-on and demos the product or the platform, that's an amazing combination because at the end of the day, the community benefits out of it, and I hope the company benefits as well. And that's been my strategy with the meetups, and it's worked so far.
How about you, Danny? Any thoughts on that?
I mean, I always have thoughts.
Deep thoughts by Danny Blue.
It's just whether or not they're any good. But can you repeat the question?
What's your name, man? No,
So
how do you feel about evangelists and developer advocates, and do you feel like there's this balance? There's a corporate agenda in some cases, or do you feel like that they're really genuinely out there to help everybody, or you think it's like a mix?
I think it's a pretty good mix because of course they're out, spewing the company line. I mean, like that's part of what they're getting paid to do. So at some point,
I don't think that's a wrong point either.
at some point, everybody, that's part of what they're doing, and that's not a bad thing. That's just part of what their job is.
Mm-hmm.
But then most of, at least any that I've been fortunate enough to run into, like I don't know how many times an episode we mentioned Rob Dawson and how nice he's been to us, but
awesome.
but he's a great example that like he is paid by Google to evangelize Polymer, but he does very strongly believe in what he's doing. He's very good at what he's doing, and he even started not a part of it. He started doing it because it was something that he enjoyed, and then Google was like, hey, that guy knows what he's doing. So I think that like people that get into it that way are maybe more genuine is not exactly the right word, but I think it's different than people that start. I don't think there are many people that come into it where they just get a job and then at some point they're like, you're going to be the evangelist for this, start learning a bunch about it. It tends to be the other way around, where people that are already experts at whatever they're doing then evangelize a given thing. So I think it's a mix. I'm sure there's there are great evangelists, and I'm sure that there are pretty terrible ones. Me personally, I've been very lucky to only talk to really awesome people. But you can't generalize, I guess.
I've been formulating a possibly contentious hypothesis while you guys were talking about this.
No, here it comes.
I have a suspicion, a very strong suspicion that projects which are entirely open source have great developer evangelists that do lots of good, and companies that are pimping a proprietary product of some kind may have developer advocates that lean toward the sales side of things, and that would be interesting to gather some thoughts on that and see if there's any validity to it.
I'm sure there is somewhere down the line. If you look at the Appcelerator guys, they will come in. They're there to sell you Appcelerator stuff. It's not so much they're trying to sell you what they can do. I mean, that's what their job is. That's what they're for. Which again, it's not a bad thing. But there is this weird line that I think sometimes you do have to be careful of, and you have to be able to form your own opinions about things. You're allowed to disagree. Even there's a lot of really smart people out there. You don't have to agree with them. I think it's pretty important that you also decide if you actually agree, or if that one article you read just made it sound really, really cool.
Yes, and basically that's we all kind of agree on this, that there's got to be some level of selling because that pays these guys' salaries. It's just I think the fine line is how much selling and how skilled the person is in selling, because I love salespeople who are not pushing yet. At the end of the talk, I'm so sold on that thing, whatever they're selling, and they don't even put a single effort to sell it. They just are so passionate or just telling me about the features, and by the end of the talk, I buy. They don't sell it to me. So there are some evangelists like that. I love working with those people.
Yeah, the evangelists that I have spoken with, they're just so passionate, like you said, about what they do,
Right.
Even talking outside of the podcast with them, yes, there is that sales aspect, but like with some companies, they won't say, well, you have to use like Rob Dodson, for instance. He won't say you have to use Polymer. He's out there to help the community, right? So, in my opinions, talking with him, because he's very genuine. He talks about try Xtag, try using Brick, do all these things, and he's not saying you have to use Polymer because it's the best. Sure, that's sort of like here's Polymer and here's the other stuff. So there is some sales, but it's I don't think that anyone's saying don't use other stuff, use only our stuff. It's more of let's help coding, and let's help bring the web forward. I think is the basic thing I get from all evangelists that I've spoken with, at least.
But I think that's part of it. Like what you just said is being knowledgeable about the area, not just about the product. Like, so not just being able to know how to explain what the features do and all these different things. Because we've had certain companies come in here to the studio to try to sell us stuff, and we'd start asking very specific questions, and they're like, oh, we don't know. We would have to go back and ask some of the developers to figure out, and that's the point where like that's who we thought we were talking to. So it definitely depends. You need to be knowledgeable about whatever it is you're talking about, not just the certain product that you're trying to evangelize. Or technology. It doesn't have to be a product, right? Like you don't have to be an evangelist for a certain product. It could be for just a certain technology that you think is cool and want people to use. You also don't have to be paid by the company to call yourself an evangelist. You can evangelize whatever you feel like evangelizing.
Actually, we could turn the question around too. Eric, you strike me as like definitely a developer advocate or evangelist for the things that you're using, even though you're not directly employed by Google to sell Polymer. I mean, you do a pretty good job of promoting that. So how does it feel to be on the other side of that, where you're trying to get people to buy into these ideas?
Well, I just want to talk about things that I'm passionate about, things that I enjoy doing, and if other people enjoy them, that's great. I personally want to learn a lot and to meet really good people who know a lot more than I do, so I can learn from them. So it's for me, it's like not just Polymer. I want to know everything. But Polymer is exciting to me because I've always wanted something that's very, at that browser level. That's very much like Angular directives. So much more to the metal. So I mean, I recently did a lot of pull requests with webcomponents.org, right? And I really want the community to get as much knowledge as I'm consuming pushed back out to these things. So Zeno Rocha and the team there, they do a wonderful job getting all these things together, and it's really easy to contribute to that project. It doesn't take much time at all to do stuff. And I get very, very passionate about doing those sort of things.
And that's the kind of passion that shows, Eric, and that's the kind of passion that I think we developers like to follow. It's not the difference between hard sell and soft sell. In a hard sell, people emphasize value and features and all that kind of stuff, but they try to steer clear from the competition. In a soft sell, people are evangelizing the industry or the whole thing, around web components or whatever it is. And we developers, I think, we tend to gravitate more towards people with charisma, with passion, and something more than just a financial gain from out of it. And to relate that to my own experience, as an organizer and speaker at a lot of events on Xamarin or Ionic or Angular web components, Polymer, I've done a lot of talks. I also have to walk a fine line between promoting my own company and getting business, drumming up business, and also, quite frankly, not looking fake and not looking like a hard seller. I just want people to understand that I'm just like you, and I like learning, and I like new technologies, and I like to be in this space and just hang out with them as developers. And as a side effect, if they want to do business with me, great. That's awesome too.
And
That's a great attitude to go with.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, it's just fun for people to like what you like, right? Hey, Rachel.
Hello.
Rachel's been sending me messages on Hangouts, so I thought I'd just give her the link.
That works. No, but it's it's true, and actually, Rachel, I'm very curious to know what you think about this. But it's whatever it is that you like. If it's a movie or if it's a video game, and I think this is why a lot of flame wars start on the internet. It's you really want people to like what you like because you want them to see the same thing in it that you see. So at the bottom of all the evangelism stuff, a lot of it is just that you're like, I'm really excited about this. Why aren't you excited about it too? And then they give you a bunch of the reasons why you get mad, and then you fight about it online.
You summed it up perfectly, man. That's exactly what happens. There's also, I think, when there's money at stake, that's also an issue. For instance,
For sure.
when you meet people who are running commercial JavaScript library that does something 100% open source does, and you are very passionate about the video tag or something, and someone's like, the Flash player is the best player that there ever was. It's still in use on YouTube. Why do you think that is? It's like, you used to be an action script rock star, didn't you? I did. What's it to you? Sometimes you get really involved in your tools, and people tend to identify more with their tools than themselves, and that's unfortunate.
It's definitely a developer tendency, myself included. Like when people talk about Grunt, I immediately want to go, oh, but Gulp does this so much better. But then I think, you know what? Grunt is just as good. It's just not, why am I stuck on a tool? It bugs me that sometimes I tend to go that way too.
It comes with the evangelism. You want to evangelize. You want everybody to like the same things that you like.
Yeah, but they don't have to, right?
They don't, absolutely. But you want to.
Yeah, they don't have to do anything, but you really, really want them to.
When I first started doing web development and design, started doing web design first, I worked at a tech school and I taught there, and I helped run the testing program there, and they had all these developer recognition programs. So they had Cisco and the Adobe program, which I was part of, and it was. And the more I was involved with these tech schools, the more I realized it was such a business where they would pull people in, push them out, spoon feed them information, and there was no like today. There's so many more options than there was when I was teaching. So it's really interesting to see how this has developed. But developer recognition programs, I guess, to my point, to me, they really felt like it was the company's trying to make a lot of money. Where it's like, hey, you have this certification to tell you this, so you obviously know what you're talking about. But, that may not be the case. That may be, yes, you know how to test well, but can you really do the work? So that's changed a lot now. But have you guys ever seen that? I shouldn't be saying this since I've recently been put into the Google Developer Expert program, but it's like to me it's like such a different thing though, because this is very very much like Google is taking a look at people who are working in the communities and saying, you've done a lot for the community. You seem to be evangelizing a lot of the things that we evangelize, so we're going to recognize you for that. And we want to learn from you, and you can learn from us, so there's benefits on both sides. So to me, that's much better than something like, I think Adobe's a great company, but I felt like the certifications that I took, and this was a while ago, keep in mind, I could look up the answers, and it didn't really tell me, it didn't really show my skill, right? It was just, do you know how to go to the channels and turn on and off a channel and do this crazy thing for some photography thing that you'll never use in what you do day to day. I ranted quite a bit there, but what are your feelings on that sort of stuff, developer recognition programs?
I think they're fine sometimes, maybe. Nobody knows. I think it starts to be a problem when you start identifying yourself as a. So I mean, even if you pick a framework, so not even recognition, but if you say, so like if I start saying I'm an Angular developer rather than saying I'm a web developer, it's putting yourself in a box, and that happens a lot in, like, especially in the consulting world. People will be like, oh, I'm a
I'm a Rails
Cisco
developer,
dev, or like I'm a Cisco dev. I only deal with Cisco systems, and that's putting yourself in such a small box, and it's not fair to you, and it's annoying, frankly. But
I think the ultimate developer recognition is when somebody uses your software and talks about it. That's the ultimate kind of recognition, as far as I'm concerned. Make something useful and find out that someone you never heard of is using this, and it gets the job done for them. That's almost better than money.
I think there's also that recognition if somebody comes and says to you, hey, you really made a difference in what I did, thank you. That's like recognition enough, right? Like
it doesn't happen very often.
Right, it doesn't. And
the money helps.
Yeah.
Money helps.
Like Rachel, you run that the weekly animation.
Web Animation Weekly, yes, at webanimationweekly.com, all one word.
So how many people do you have like submitting for you? Because you have a submission form where people can just send stuff that they find.
Actually, I have quite a few people submitting. It'd be a little easier for them to submit if I had some time to put into the design of the website and put a big old submit button on there. But I don't. So it's just a link, and you have to kind of read to see it on the rather sad text-based page. I have a designer who's contributing some help, but it'll be a while because, of course, it's free help. Free help takes time. And but anyway, like the number of people submitting, I've gotten a fair amount of submissions. As the readership grows, I'd say there's like one person submitting something for every, I'd say for like every 10 readers there have been, and it's useful, but it's making me think I need something better than a spreadsheet for managing these, because sometimes they're duplicates. It gets hard to remember, like, did I already feature this? But I love it because it makes the community bring new information to me, and it makes my it's not really a job, it doesn't pay, it makes my job easier.
Yeah, I mean, I bring that up because I think it would be really nice when you hear, wow, people are actually, they want to help me with this newsletter, so they're submitting all these links.
Yeah, and I think some of it's also vanity. A lot of people submit their own links. That's all right. I do the same thing with
That's
the
a
other
question on your form, too.
Well, sometimes I might look at this and be like, how did you do that? And I want to have their email address so I can chase them down and be like, so what exactly were you doing with this SVG file here? This looks pretty cool. But that's more for me than for the newsletter. I never have the time to do those sorts of questions before it goes out every week. But I wanted to make the newsletter just because it was an easier way for me to keep track of everything that was going on. And it seemed like not everybody wants to follow me on Twitter and like sift through my tweets for those tweets. It would be better if I could just pump them into an email for some people.
Right. How hard is it, Rachel, to come up with content for the newsletter?
Not that hard. Animation's blowing up right now. And I love the web animation field. We're talking about evangelists and communities, and I think that my major regret about the web animation field is that there is no such thing as a web animation evangelist. It's no more than you'd have like video tag evangelists. It's out there, and the community is just gonna take over it. There are people who work on the spec, but it's not owned by any one company, which is great because when we saw companies owning something like web animation, we ended up with a very closed circuit, like with Flash and Adobe. But it's also kind of sad because there's no companies who are just going to pour money into blue sky projects with web animation because it's such a public property.
Well, I think you are. I've said this before. I think you are the web animation spokesperson.
I don't know that I wanted this job. I don't know how this ended up happening. I was like,
You
I want to
made the
make
job.
money. And then I came into this. It's like, this is not making money. How did I end up doing this? This is another labor of love. God damn it. It's like comics all over again.
Now we're gonna make sure to go and visit your website now and get all the updates and get it on the mailing list so I can get the latest news from the world of animation.
It's pretty cool. It's pretty wide, too. Like, there's web animation done with Canvas, there's web animation in the DOM, there's SVG animation, there's WebGL. It's like, it goes on and on. How do you want to make things move in the browser? And browsers are just racing to keep up and update their entire rendering model, because in the beginning, a page would load and it wouldn't move around a whole lot unless you were scrolling. And now things have changed. So lots of underpinnings have to be looked at again.
I feel like a lot of the browser vendors, especially when people started doing that stuff, were just like, wait, you want to do what? You want to do what with the paragraph that you had right there? Why? And it's sometimes just designers do designery things, and then people got to figure out how to make it happen. It's all falling on the browser vendors because now there's an expectation.
Okay, guys, I need to jump off. I apologize, but my battery is almost dead. So I thank you very much. I enjoyed this conversation a lot.
Yeah, thanks for coming, Lynn. We really
No worries, absolutely. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, hopefully I'll join you next time too.
Is there anything you'd like to share before you go? How people can contact you?
The website is at movel.co, movel.co, and the meetup group is Mobile DC, and hopefully that's where I can see if people are local to the DC area. We'll be happy to hang out, and if they're not, they can still join us because we're thinking of Google Hangouts as a digital platform for our meetup. So thanks for this opportunity. Nice to meet you all, guys.
See you later.
Bye.
But where were we? We were talking about communities and evangelism.
Yeah.
Yes, we were. I think you kind of. Everybody else has given their opinion, but so one of the things that got brought up before was the difference between evangelists that are, someone that's just very involved in the community. So so Google has a bunch of evangelists for their various platforms, and those people tend to be very knowledgeable about what they're talking about. But you can also have evangelists for they're almost more salesmen than they are actual evangelists for the platform. I'm curious what your opinions were on that.
I've met most types, and different evangelists have different styles. I mean, there are the very. I think I was commenting to Eric about this when I was watching, that there are definitely, and I've heard this from people when I've been in the speaking community, that whenever a company that needs an evangelist sees that one of their developers is remotely capable of socializing without offending people, they're like, hey, you want to be an evangelist? You like to travel? You're not a homebody? That's great. Go out there and rep to the audience. And they go out there and they're just, they're kind of going through the motions. It's like, yeah, it's a company I work at. We make this thing. That's cool. We want to go get some beers. But that's not quite the same as like what you'll get from Rob Dodson, who's like, want to talk about polymer? Okay, you don't want to talk about polymer. Let me tell you about some things that I like polymer. Let's have fun. Like hyper puppy dog type. You can tell they're just this is fun and this is love for them. And there are definitely differences between those. And you know what? Both of those, I would say that in non-commercial evangelism roles, you will only find puppy dogs who are really excited. In commercial ones, you will possibly run across the more laid-back, I'm a just go with the flow kind of evangelist. So I can appreciate both kinds, but when you're excited, it's nice to have people who are equally as excited.
Yeah, for sure. I'm trying to think if I've ever met anybody who's been like trying to sell me on some versus like just talk to me. And I've
Aren't
only
those
seen
called
that in,
salesmen?
well, other than salesman, I'm talking about someone who is a developer evangelist or advocate or however, whatever you want to, call the role. It's different for different companies, right? Developer relations. And I can't think of any offhand. Different ways of talking about things for sure. But yeah, I'm trying to think. I'm sure it's happened.
Yeah, the only experiences like that I've had have been with, like Rachel said, with commercial. This is the product that we make. We need people to use it, and then we need you to buy the updated support packages so that we can start charging you for it. So those are the only times I've run into those particular types.
Oh,
Yeah.
I actually do remember a very salesman-y type evangelist. And that's actually very dangerous, because when you have people in the community who start mixing opinion very heavily with fact, and they're an evangelism role for a company, it can be very confusing to the public to know what is real and what isn't. We've had some problems with that in the animation community, because there's all of this, is 60 frames per second as important as we think it is? What is more performant? People think that there's some sort of an issue with CSS versus JavaScript, but like the actual issues are very complex, and some people, occasionally try to actively confuse the audience. And so, as a person in the animation community, I try to discourage companies actively from doing that. In my own way, talk about tone, that sort of thing, privately. And for the most part, companies will listen if you go to them and say, "Look, I know you're really excited about your product, and you have a lot of faith in it, and I appreciate that. But you also have a really wide audience, and you want to make sure that you're not alienating half of them or misinforming the other half." But I think. Huh?
Yeah. I was going to say it's not pitching a tool to fix a problem. It's more of, you want your tool to be what you use to fix the problem. Because that happens a lot, where some people will say this is the problem, and then it's like that the famous Stack Overflow question, where a guy's like, how do I add two numbers together in JavaScript? And like the number one upvoted answer is you should probably use jQuery, and everything below it's like, yeah, your jQuery is the best. It's stuff like that, where they have to like, oh, you have this problem with animation. We have this great tool that solves all of your problems. You don't even have to worry about it, and it kind of masks the problem.
And if it's a commercial product, it seems all the more like awkward. jQuery is at least non-commercial open source, but no, and when I was getting into JavaScript, I was one of the people who was like, the jQuery answer is the right one.
Because it's easiest, right?
Right, and now I have a different perspective. Your perspective changes on your career path quite a bit, but I think they have their place. If anybody, especially in the animation world, a lot of our big advancements they happen because people have commercial products or have funding. For instance, the Flash user interface, that was developed commercially, but I guarantee you any interface that any dev tools represent in the future going forward will be influenced by it. That was a commercial project, and we're going to make good on those echoes for years to come.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting, how this is all, how this all happens, and community, and I've seen it with the web components community. You talked about the animation community and how there's been some people there, and I've been thinking about this, and I remember reading an article from Zenarocha where he talked about naming your custom elements, and I'm going to get to a point here, but there is, like, the elements, a lot of people are trying to name the elements, like my company element, my name element, to namespace them, where when you're developing for these things, he was saying that you shouldn't name something based on that. You should name it for what it does, to use for semantic approach. And I do see in the web components community there are a lot of components that are being built that are like, my company dash carousel, my company dash this. And then, they want you to go to their site and download it. They don't put it on GitHub. So it's very like using like contributions like blogs and posts on Polymer or something, and then, not selling their own stuff, but, come to our site and we'll give you these type of things.
Right. I have mixed feelings on that kind of behavior.
Yeah.
On the one hand, eyeballs are the only currency you have in some situations. And that kind of goes against the grain of the, collective on GitHub.
It's true. It's at some point somebody both wants and deserves credit for whatever it is. You just have to figure out the best way to do it. And I think part of that's also knowing your audience, right? So I think it's who are you trying to get to use this thing. So if you really want it to be a very open source developer, focused thing, namespacing with your company is probably not the best idea. But depending on who you're looking at, sometimes that makes the most sense. Sometimes that's the easiest way to do it, especially if you are pitching, if you're pitching a thing to a certain large corporation, and then however many eyes are going to have eyes on just this one name that's in the that keeps showing up in their code base. I mean, I guess it depends. I am unfortunately going to use this as a good time to leave because I think I'm taking up one of the last conference rooms in here, and so I need to get out before they start yelling at me.
All right. We should wrap up a little bit. I mean, I think the only thing we really didn't talk about was, classes and education, and I think that Rachel has probably a good amount of things to say on that, since you do awesome workshops abroad and locally.
Is that the only prompt you're going to give me?
And go.
And yeah.
Oh man. All right, I'll try. So education. Well, to be fair, I'm educating about free tools. It's not like I'm going out there and showing people how to use GreenSock or Velocity or any of these libraries that people are starting to come up with to handle some pretty tricky animation problems. When I'm educating people, I'm teaching them about CSS animation, transition, web animation API. This is like the very bare bones, they're about the most open source components of web animation that you can get. So that's what I'm teaching about. And when you're teaching about that sort of thing, and there's not like nobody's back there saying we are going to fund training for people to learn how to use web animations API. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but it's a lot different from like Tumblr saying, oh my god, we use this animation library all the time, have a little extra money to work on it, and then you're like, oh, I got some extra money, I'm going to go teach some people how to use this. No, all of my training efforts have to be commercial. So here's this open source, uniquely like 100% open source technology, and to teach about it has to be commercial because it doesn't have money coming from the backside. So it's kind of, sometimes I'm torn because I want to help out more. Like I want to participate more in the local community, like Girl Develop It. I would love to go to more conferences and speak more about these things, but at the end of the day, when I'm going around training and evangelizing, I'm not getting paid, and I still need to make income somehow. So I love teaching, but you do preferably need to have some sort of income or funding or some kind of support system while you're doing it, or you can run into the red really easily without noticing.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, when I was teaching, I was getting paid. So I totally understand that.
I realize that most developers are not in my situation. They are not crazy enough to leave a good job just to fuck off and do whatever they want.
I am, all right.
What about you guys? Tell me more about how you teach and your experiences.
Well, when I was teaching, I did have the issues of a lot of the schools I was at. I'm not going to name names, but they were very much about getting students in, getting students out. We don't care if they learn, just push them through the program, and I didn't like that at all.
Yeah.
So I wanted to do more of the programs rather than a week boot camp or a day. And people would come in having this expectation that they would learn Photoshop in 8 hours, right? And they're given a book that says, first thing you do, file open. It's like very spoon-fed. So people are thinking they're going to be masters of Photoshop in 8 hours. And it doesn't happen. Okay, you have to practice. There's a lot you need to do. So to have something where you have goals, like longer term, for students, I found was much more advantageous, but at that time, the schools were not evolved enough yet. For mostly, the ones that were went out of business quickly, which sucked. So now there's a lot more options, right? There's Code School, there's Code Academy, and what's Hack Reactor. There's so many things. There's programs like Girl Develop It, which is awesome. Rails Girls, some really good stuff out there. And I think if I had a lot of those types of organizations around when I was teaching, it probably would have been a much nicer experience. Although my students were incredible, I loved each and every one of them, though.
Yeah, the teaching landscape has sure changed a whole lot.
Yeah, it certainly has. I mean, there's a lot. You're going out there and you're doing these great workshops for web animation, and that wasn't even a thing when I was teaching. Web animation was, we're going to learn Flash.
All right. Here's a lovely commercial program, and that was commercial from both sides.
Yeah.
I'm actually looking at moving some of my workshops online, just because not everybody can afford to ship their physical body and go some other place to do something in a room. So I've considered just taking some of the workshops that I do and putting them like on Use Fedora or something like that. I know some people, they like get WordPress site together and they set it up to be like its own sort of training site. That just sounds like way too much commitment for me.
Yeah, it does seem like a lot of work. There's successful ones like egghead.io, and there's what's the other one? The one that James Shore does. Let's Code JavaScript, I think. Is that the one?
Mm-hmm.
So there's some really good ones out there, but that's a full-time job in itself.
As far as cultivating the community goes, I think if a community has the free resources to put together some educational materials like that and make them available, like I know some projects, they make these courses freely available to some of those programs we talked about. Just help train more people and get more developers on board with their project. I think that's a really clever way to go about promoting a project.
Yeah, for sure. I found too, the simpler you get, the smaller a video for screencasts. Like if you're just teaching one small thing, that's much easier for people than a lot of the videos I see on YouTube where it's like an hour long. Let's learn how to do Bower and do all these things, and people get intimidated, and myself included. 15 minutes in, I'm like, okay, I can't watch anymore. I have to go do some work.
That's a good observation, and I confess sometimes I do make really long videos. Like I just did this cartooning course, and I think people like the 15-minute long videos the best.
Yeah.
But sometimes you're just showing so much stuff. It's like if I had more time, I would have made a smaller video.
Yeah, as I say this while we're on a 1-hour podcast.
Which is overflowing, isn't it?
Yes, it is. We should wrap it up.
All right.
Is there anything else we need to bring up?
I've had a great time. Let's bring that up.
Yes, I have had a wonderful time. Thanks for badgering me into giving you the URL, Rachel.
I did not badger you. I was just doing running commentary, and you were like, "Oh my God, is she
just
ever?"
Come on already. No, it's been great though. Thank you.
Thank you for having me, guys.
Yeah, and I'm glad Levent. I had just met him a couple weeks ago, and I was like, you gotta come on the podcast sometime. So it was nice to have him. Nice to have Danny back. And Christian, I don't think I've seen you since you started Anvil Connect. So
Oh, that's not true.
occasionally here and there. So, but
It's always fun to hear what you guys are up to over here in Animation Land. I don't always know, like, there's a what library? When did that
that's how
happen?
I feel when I read your newsletter. I'm like, oh, we can do that now? Sweet.
It's important to keep all these silos connected somehow.
Yeah, we have to figure it out. All right, we're going to wrap it up. So thanks, everybody, for joining us.
Bye.
And next week, we're going to be talking with Sebastian. I think it's Mark Baj? I'm totally butchering his name, I'm sure. But he's a core member of the React team at Facebook. And we're going to be talking about building with React. So we'll see you next week.